The transition into adulthood felt complete when the young man moved into his first house. Beneath the living space lay a vast basement, a labyrinth of plywood and exposed framing. He enjoyed the maze-like quality of the storage rooms, never suspecting the corners held more than old boxes. One ordinary weeknight, he descended the stairs to tackle a simple load of laundry. He noticed the basement lights were already burning, casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete. In the corner of his eye, a sudden movement behind a folding table broke the stillness. He locked eyes with a stranger who was crouching low like a cornered animal. The intruder appeared as if he had just emerged from the depths of a sewer. Suddenly, the man stood and bolted deeper into the maze of the back rooms. The homeowner scrambled backward, desperate to reach the safety of the stairs. Before he could take another step, the basement plunged into absolute, crushing darkness. He tripped over an unseen obstacle and collapsed onto the hard, cold floor. Disoriented and without his phone, he began to scream to ward off the hidden threat. To his horror, a mocking scream erupted from the other side of the dark room. The intruder's voice sounded like a man possessed, far more terrifying than his own. He began to crawl through the blackness, guided only by the touch of the damp walls. He could hear the intruder moving with him, mirroring his steps with terrifying precision. The sensation that the stranger knew the house better than he did began to settle in. Heavy breathing sounded right behind his neck, closer than he ever thought possible. His hand finally struck the wooden base of the staircase after what felt like hours. As he lunged upward, a powerful hand clamped around his ankle and yanked him back. His head slammed against the railing, and he tumbled back down into the abyss. The stranger began to drag him away from the stairs with inhuman, terrifying strength. He thrashed and kicked wildly, finally connecting his boot with the intruder's face. Breaking free, he sprinted up the steps as the screaming started again behind him. He slammed the basement door and threw his entire body weight against it. Seconds later, a massive impact shook the door as the intruder charged from below. He kicked off his socks to gain traction on the floor, bracing for the next strike. The door swung open for a horrifying moment before he managed to force it shut again. Eventually, the footsteps retreated back down into the depths of the basement. He grabbed his phone from the counter and called the police with shaking hands. When the authorities arrived, the basement was empty, and the intruder was gone. An officer pointed out a forced window, suggesting the man had been living there for weeks. The most disturbing detail was that the stranger knew exactly where the hidden light switch was. 4 months later, he moved out, unable to ever feel safe in that house again. To this day, he is certain that the man in the basement intended to end his life. The memory of those screams in the dark remains a permanent scar on his mind. Some basements hold more than just memories. They hold predators waiting for the light to go out. The reality of a stranger sharing your sanctuary is a nightmare no one should ever face. He never looked back at the house, leaving the shadows of the basement behind forever. The transition from a full house to total solitude felt like a rite of passage for my 14-year-old self. My parents had departed for an out-of-state wedding, leaving me under the supposed supervision of my college-aged sister. A single text message shattered that plan, as she chose a college party over babysitting her younger brother. I decided to keep the secret to myself, relishing the rare opportunity for unlimited, unsupervised gaming. For 6 hours, the virtual battlefields of Halo were my only reality, as the neighborhood outside fell into a deep slumber. The clock had just ticked past midnight when a rhythmic tapping sound broke my concentration. It seemed to originate from the backyard, a faint tick-tick-tick against the vinyl siding of the house. I dismissed it as a stray branch caught in the breeze, a common enough occurrence in our wooded lot. Minutes later, the sound returned, but this time it felt as if the source was moving along the perimeter. The tapping was too deliberate, too rhythmic to be the mindless scratching of a tree limb. I reached for the remote and muted the television, plunging the room into a heavy, expectant silence. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs as I strained to hear over the sound of my own pulse. When nothing followed for several minutes, I convinced myself it was just a raccoon and tried to relax. Then, a new sound vibrated through the floorboards directly beneath my feet. It was the same tapping, but now it was echoing from the hollow confines of the unfinished basement. Our basement was a cavernous, dark space used primarily for storage and housing, a small, rarely used kitchenette. Forced by a terrifying need to know, I stood up and crept toward the basement door. I reasoned that a stray animal must have found its way through one of the small, ground-level windows. I gripped the cold brass knob and slowly pulled the door open, revealing the black maw of the staircase. The tapping was louder here, a sharp clink against glass that repeated every few seconds. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking and sounding far smaller than I intended. The tapping stopped instantly, as if whatever was down there was now listening back to me. The light switch was at the very bottom of the stairs, and I refused to take a single step into that void. I came up with a plan to use my phone's camera flash to see what was lurking in the corners. I partially closed the door, leaving only a small gap to slide my hand through. I aimed the lens toward the far wall where the windows were located and hit record. The flash strobed, briefly illuminating the concrete walls and dusty storage bins in bursts of harsh white light. I pulled my hand back, slammed the door, and engaged the deadbolt with a frantic click. My hands were trembling so violently that I almost dropped the phone as I prepared to watch the footage. I hit play, watching the grainy, low-quality video skip through the darkness with every flash. In the final frame of the strobe, a figure was standing perfectly still beneath the small basement window. I let out a scream that I couldn't control, a primal sound of pure, unadulterated terror. I bolted for my bedroom, sliding across the hardwood floor and locking myself inside. With shaking fingers, I dialed my father, who immediately contacted the local police on my behalf. While I was on the line, a thunderous bang erupted from the basement door downstairs. The intruder was trying to kick his way into the main part of the house, each strike sounding like a gunshot. After 6 or 7 violent blows, the banging stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The sirens eventually cut through the night, and blue and red lights began to dance across my bedroom ceiling. The officers searched the basement, but the intruder had already vanished back through the window he'd entered. It wasn't until they inspected the kitchenette that they found the most chilling piece of evidence. The largest carving knife was missing from the rack, meaning the man in the video had been armed while I stood just feet away. Decades later, that grainy video remains a ghost in my memory, a reminder of how close I came to a different ending. But the missing knife was never found, leaving a lingering question about what the intruder intended to do with it. Just as I thought the terror of the basement was a singular event, I would soon learn that these intruders are rarely just passing through. For another student across town, the rustling in the dark wasn't an animal, and the cat was already upstairs. The basement had always been my personal sanctuary, a sprawling underground retreat from the rest of the world. My parents had turned it into a comfortable hangout space years ago with a big TV and several storage rooms in the back. Because they preferred the living room upstairs, the entire lower level was essentially mine to use whenever I wanted. Every night before my parents went to bed, they would put our cat, Rocky, down there so he wouldn't wake them up. Rocky was an annoyingly friendly orange tabby who constantly demanded attention from anyone in the house. On that particular Friday night, I had invited a girl named Madeline over to watch a movie. It was late, and I had simply assumed that my parents had already brought Rocky down for the night. A faint rustling sound suddenly drifted from one of the storage rooms in the far back corner. I didn't think much of it, figuring it was just the cat rummaging through some old cardboard boxes. It sounded exactly like the kind of noise an energetic cat would make while exploring. Madeline tensed up beside me, so I quickly explained that it was just my cat playing in the back. We turned our attention back to the movie, trying to ignore the intermittent sounds from the shadows. Every few minutes, A soft thud or a rhythmic rustle would echo through the quiet room. Madeline kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes wide with a growing sense of dread. I continued to insist that Rocky was just being unusually active and liked to climb on the shelving. Then, a distinct scratching sound began at the top of the wooden basement stairs. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized that specific scratching pattern immediately. It was Rocky, scratching at the other side of the door to be let in from the kitchen. A cold realization washed over me that the cat was not in the basement with us at all. If Rocky was upstairs, then something else had been making those noises in the storage room for the last hour. I didn't say a word, too terrified to even breathe as I processed the impossibility of the situation. Suddenly, Madeline let out a blood-curdling scream that pierced through the heavy silence of the room. I spun around and saw a small foam football rolling slowly across the carpeted floor. It had clearly just been thrown out from the pitch-black opening of the storage room. Without thinking, I grabbed Madeline's arm and bolted toward the stairs as fast as I could. We scrambled up the steps, our feet thudding loudly on the wood as we fled the darkness. I slammed the basement door shut and threw my weight against it, gasping for air. Madeline was sobbing hysterically as I reached for the phone to call my parents upstairs. Within minutes, the police arrived and began a systematic search of every corner of our house. To my absolute shock, they found no one hiding in the storage rooms or anywhere else downstairs. I stood on the back deck, watching the garage door intently to make sure no one slipped out. All the basement windows were still locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. The officers suggested that the intruder must have escaped through the garage just before they arrived. But I knew that was impossible, because my eyes hadn't left that exit for a single second. If they didn't go out the window and didn't use the garage, where could they have possibly gone? My parents eventually dismissed the whole thing as a prank or a wild imagination, despite Madeline's witness. I never got a resolution, and the memory of that foam football rolling out of the dark still haunts me. To this day, I am 100% certain that someone was living in the spaces we couldn't see. But as I moved on from that house, I realized that some basements hold secrets much closer to home. Years later, a young boy would sit in his own basement, hearing a familiar groan that wasn't a stranger's voice at all. The blue light of the TV screen flickered against the wood-paneled walls of the finished basement. 11-year-old Mark was lost in a world of pixels, oblivious to the heavy silence of the house above him. A low, guttural groan suddenly drifted through the vents, cutting through the electronic music of the game. He paused the game, holding his breath to listen for any follow-up sound from the darkness. The sound came again, a long and rhythmic moan that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It originated from behind the heavy steel door of the boiler room, situated at the far end of the hallway. Mark stood up, his legs feeling heavy like lead, as he took a tentative step toward the noise. Every creak of the floor beneath his feet felt like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. He reached the steel door and placed his hand on the cold, vibrating metal surface. From the other side, a voice that didn't sound human hissed a string of nonsensical syllables. Mark bolted back to the stairs, scrambling up to the safety of the locked kitchen door. When his father returned home, he laughed and told Mark it was just the old pipes knocking in the winter air. But Mark knew that pipes didn't whisper names or weep when the sun went down. For the next 3 years, he avoided the boiler room entirely, treating it as a haunted tomb. He noticed his mother carrying trays of food down there when she thought he was asleep. Whenever he asked about the extra groceries, his parents would change the subject with practiced ease. One summer afternoon, the house was empty except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Mark, now 14, felt a surge of rebellious curiosity that outweighed his childhood fear. He crept down the stairs, the familiar smell of mildew and cold concrete greeting him. The boiler room door was unlocked for the first time in his memory. He pushed it open, the hinges screaming a protest that made his heart skip a beat. Inside was not a furnace, but a small, cramped living space furnished with a cot and a single chair. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed skin and rotting food scraps. On the table sat a stack of drawings, all depicting the same distorted, screaming face. A sudden movement in the corner of the room made Mark spin around, his breath hitching. A gaunt figure with long matted hair sat huddled behind a pile of blankets. The man didn't attack. he simply began to rock back and forth, humming that same mournful tune. Mark realized with a jolt of recognition that this man had his father's eyes and his mother's smile. He heard the back door upstairs open and his father's heavy footsteps across the kitchen floor. Mark fled the room and hid behind the furnace as his father descended the stairs. His father entered the boiler room and spoke in a low, commanding voice to the shadow inside. "You have to be quiet today, Arthur," he whispered. "The neighbors are suspicious." Mark stayed hidden until long after his father had locked the steel door once again. He never spoke of what he saw, but the house never felt like a home after that day. Years later, after his parents passed away, Mark found the old medical records in the attic. His uncle Arthur had been erased from the family history after a violent mental breakdown. To avoid the shame of an institution, they had kept him as a prisoner in his own basement for decades. The ghostly groans Mark heard as a child were the cries of a man begging to be seen. Even now, Mark sometimes hears a faint scratching beneath the floorboards of his new house. He wonders if his own family is keeping a secret he isn't meant to find until it's too late. But the truth of why these strangers choose our homes is far more clinical and calculated than a family secret. The real danger isn't who is hiding in the basement, but how easily they got in through the front door. The terrifying reality is that your home is often less of a fortress and more of a sieve. We often focus on the front door, while the basement remains a forgotten gateway. Statistics show that basement windows are the most neglected security points in modern residential architecture. Intruders like the ones in these stories aren't always looking for valuables to steal. Psychologists refer to some of these individuals as phantoms or squatters who crave the proximity of a family. They learn the rhythm of your life by listening through the vents and floorboards. They know when you go to work, and they know when you're most vulnerable. In the case of the first victim, the intruder had lived there long enough to find the light switch in total darkness. This implies a level of familiarity that suggests weeks or even months of undetected residency. The second story highlights how a simple lack of a lock on the basement door can escalate a burglary into a home invasion. That intruder wasn't just stealing, he was arming himself with a kitchen knife. This shift in behavior indicates a transition from theft to a potential violent encounter. Why do these people choose basements specifically? Basements provide multiple exits, sound dampening, and are rarely visited by the homeowners. In the third story, the intruder utilized a garage connection to vanish without a trace. It raises the question, where did they go if they didn't leave through the main exit? Sometimes the answer is that they never left the house at all. They simply moved to a different, even more hidden compartment. The fourth story introduces an even more sinister element, the family secret. A mentally unstable relative being hidden in the boiler room is a trope of horror, but for that boy, it was reality. This highlights a different kind of vulnerability, the trust we place in our parents to keep us safe. By framing a real threat as a prank, the parents effectively neutralize the boy's survival instincts. We must look at the physical layout of these homes to understand the ease of these incidents. Labyrinthine partitions made of plywood create blind spots that an intruder can use to navigate around the owner. As the owner moves toward the laundry, the intruder is already circling behind to the stairs. This tactical advantage is why so many victims feel like the intruder knows the house better than they do. Another factor is the psychological denial we experience when confronted with the impossible. The brain refuses to register a stranger in its safe space, often leading to delayed reactions. By the time the adrenaline kicks in, the intruder has often already closed the distance. Let's examine the common entry points: sliding glass doors, pet doors, and coal chutes. Many old homes still have coal chutes that lead directly into the boiler room. These are often forgotten by the current owners, but are well known to those looking for a way in. Security experts suggest that a simple motion-activated light in the basement could prevent 80% of these encounters. Yet, we prefer to leave those spaces in the dark, out of sight and out of mind. This neglect is exactly what the basement dweller counts on. They want the peace and quiet of your home without the burden of paying for it. In many cases, these squatters will even clean up after themselves to avoid detection. You might think you just misplaced that bag of chips or left the door unlocked by mistake. But the truth is much more invasive. The psychology of the intruder changes once they are discovered, shifting from stealth to survival. And when they are backed into a corner, their next move is always unpredictable. As we look closer at these security flaws, we realize that the most dangerous part of the house is the part we ignore. But what happens to the mind after the intruder is gone? The walls of your sanctuary start to feel like they are closing in, hiding secrets you can't see. Even as you lock the doors tonight, you have to wonder if the problem is already inside. For those who have faced a stranger in the dark, the basement is no longer just a room for storage. It becomes a physical manifestation of the vulnerability we all try to ignore in our daily lives. Psychologists often refer to this phenomenon as the violation of the internal sanctuary. Our homes are meant to be the one place where the outside world cannot reach us. But when that boundary is crossed, the sense of safety doesn't just return once, the intruder is gone. Every creak of a floorboard or hum of a boiler becomes a potential threat. The first survivor we discussed moved out of his home only 4 months after his encounter. He realized that no amount of new locks could erase the memory of those eyes in the darkness. For the teenager who recorded the intruder, the trauma manifested as a lifelong obsession with security. He still wonders if that missing kitchen knife is tucked away in a box somewhere, or if it stayed with the man. The student who was with his friend that night never looked at his garage the same way again. The impossibility of the intruder's escape created a permanent loop of what if in his mind. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt by the boy who grew up to find his parents had lied. The realization that the horror was not an external threat, but a hidden family secret, destroyed his trust. This form of trauma is often called gaslighting by omission, where the victim is told their fear is a joke. These survivors all share a common symptom: hypervigilance. They are constantly scanning their environments for anomalies that others might miss. This hypervigilance is a double-edged sword, providing a sense of control while also fueling chronic anxiety. It forces the individual to live in a state of perpetual readiness for a fight that may never come again. In the aftermath of a basement intrusion, the floor beneath your feet never feels quite solid. You begin to wonder what else could be living in the spaces between the walls. You start to map out the blind spots of your own home, realizing how many there truly are. The psychological toll is often invisible to friends and family who didn't share the experience. To them, it's a scary story to be told at parties, but to the survivor, it's a permanent shift in reality. The fear of the dark becomes a fear of the unknown actors who might inhabit it. We often talk about home security as a matter of locks and alarms. But true security is a state of mind, and once broken, it is incredibly difficult to repair. The survivors find themselves checking the basement windows every single night before bed. They listen for the specific rhythm of the house, waiting for a beat that doesn't belong. They consider the possibility that someone is watching them right now, from a place they haven't checked. This retrospective study shows that the basement represents the subconscious mind in horror, the place where we hide what we don't want to see. When a real person enters that space, the metaphor becomes a terrifying reality. Even years later, the survivors describe a cold spot in their memory whenever they think of their old homes. They don't just remember the intruder, they remember the feeling of their world shrinking. The loss of safety is a wound that never quite heals, only scars over. We must ask ourselves if we are ever truly alone, or if we are simply the current occupants of a shared space. The strangers in these stories didn't just want to take things, they wanted to take up space. They lived parallel lives to the families above, a shadow existence in the foundations. And even when they are caught, the question remains, how long were they actually there? The most unsettling part of these stories isn't the confrontation, but the silence that preceded it. Because for every intruder that is found, there is another who remains, even now, perfectly still in the dark. The screen flickers in the quiet room as the search for Aunt Debbie finally reaches a dead end. Some questions are better left unanswered, but the silence from my parents felt like a physical weight. I keep thinking about that night in the boiler room and the sound of my mom's voice that wasn't actually her. It makes me wonder what other secrets were hidden behind those locked basement doors for all those years. My parents swore they had my best interests at heart, yet they allowed a dangerous stranger to remain under our feet. We view our homes as fortresses of safety, but these stories prove how easily that sanctuary is breached. Whether it is a squatter in a maze of plywood or a family member hidden in the boiler room, the threat is real. The most terrifying realization is not that someone is in the house, but that they have been there for a long time. It takes only one missed lock or one ignored rustle in the dark to change your life forever. The trauma of these encounters lingers in the way we look at shadows and the way we listen to the night. I still find myself checking the basement every night before I go to sleep, even now. The air always feels a bit colder at the bottom of the stairs, as if the darkness itself is breathing. My parents still refuse to talk about Debbie, acting as if those years of secrecy never happened. But the memory of that woman standing in the laundry room is burned into my mind. I often wonder if she is still out there, finding another basement to call her own. We must accept that we can never truly know the people we share our lives with, nor the secrets they keep. The stories shared here are not just nightmares, they are warnings for the wary. Lock your doors, check your windows, and never assume you are truly alone in the house. Because the darkness underneath your feet is much deeper than you think. I can still hear the faint scratching on the floorboards sometimes when the house is quiet. It serves as a reminder that the past is never truly buried in the concrete. I finally decided to move out of that house and never look back. Leaving behind the memories was easy, but the fear followed me to the new place. You can change your address, but you cannot change the fact that people are capable of anything. Every rustle, every creak, and every unexplained sound now has a face in my mind. The world is full of hidden corners where the desperate and the disturbed find shelter. We are never as safe as we choose to believe we are. I hope those who went through these horrors have found some semblance of peace. But peace is a fragile thing when you know what hides in the dark. Some of you watching might even have a guest you haven't met yet. Take a moment to listen to the silence of your own home tonight. If you hear a sound you can't explain, don't assume it is just the wind. It could be someone waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. The secrets of the basement are often the secrets of the soul. We bury what we fear, hoping it stays beneath the surface. But the truth always has a way of finding its way back up the stairs. As I finish this account, I feel a strange sense of closure mingled with dread. Sharing these stories is my way of making sure they are not forgotten. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and always keep a light on in the dark. Because the person in the basement might be closer than you think.